that's better. All right. Okay, so I guess we're going to start now. Sorry for the delay. So what I'd like to start talking about first, I guess, broad strokes, what is OpenDroneMap? Obviously, if you're here, you're probably at least marginally familiar. But, OpenDroneMap is a suite of tools that perform photogrammetry and reconstruction on data, typically from drones, but not necessarily just in that, arena. Stephen Mather, Klaus Carson, Jeremy Davis, and a few others on the forum have actually submitted some really awesome data sets using either ground-based multi-camera rigs, in the case of Stephen, with like ODM 360, which is sort of like, I guess, a semi-related sister project, or in the case of Klaus, taking a GoPro on his backpack when he's biking or walking, and Jeremy, who's Optic Unity on the forum, did a reconstruction using a 360 camera of the inside of a building. So sort of, I guess, of like a different way of interacting with the tools than most people would expect, right? With OpenDroneMap, but it's not just that. It's an incredibly powerful tool set that allows you to apply these tools and processes that are typically used in that arena in other, inventive and interesting ways that add a lot of value to different people's workflows. So, broad strokes, the types of things you can expect to get out of OpenDroneMap would be probably the most basic thing would be the digital surface model. So that's a TIFF, typically, a grayscale image where lower elevation values map to a darker color, say black, and higher elevation values map to a higher color, say white. And that's used in a lot of GIS analyses to get an overview of the terrain. Another typical product most people expect is the Ortho Photo, which is different in many ways than what one would get out of, say, a naive stitching program. Excuse me, someone's in the waiting room. Welcome. I haven't missed too much. All this goes for everyone. If at any point you have a question, there's the raise hand button in the bottom. You can hit that. You can try to get my attention in the chat, or you can just sort of unmute and stop me and ask a question, or just let me know that you want to ask something later. If you guys want to have your cameras on or off, totally fine. So the Ortho Photo is a specific type of imagery that's ortho-rectified. So that means it corrects for distortion and the position of the camera relative to the terrain. And that's a very useful product. Everyone's sort of used to it from Google Maps and stuff like that. But being able to use the tools available to you, so your drone, your fixed wing, a kite camera, whatever you have, to get up to the day, potentially, imagery is really powerful. So sort of tying into that, I sort of mentioned that OpenDroneMap is a suite of tools. So there's an ecosystem around and behind OpenDroneMap, right? What I'm talking about is sort of a selection of those tools in the ecosystem. How you doing, Adam? And there are a number of different ways to avail yourself of those tools, depending upon sort of like a decision tree. And I'm trying to think of ways to sort of help people work through that tree, because it is complex. There's a lot of tools and there's a lot of ways to get to those tools. And when I was a part of the community, I would sort of get confused and lost myself. But I guess the way I want to look at it, or have folks sort of approach it, is one of the most important things is, what am I running this on, right? Are you running it on Windows, Mac, Linux, right? And that's sort of like the first part of the branch. And then for almost all of those platforms, there's two diverging paths from there, where you could be, am I comfortable sort of messing around in the command line a little bit? Can I compile things from source if you're on Linux? Or would I like something that's basically a one-click install, right? So to that end, I'm going to share my screen. So if you are making that point on the decision tree where you're deciding, perhaps what I would like to do is to have an easy installer, UAV4Geo, which is the company that I'm employed for currently, along with Piero, offers a number of these installers. So what this does is this sort of abstracts away a lot of the configuration and manual processes you would do to get OpenDroneMap and the various tools running on your system. At least for the Windows version, the native installer, you have a nice auto update functionality. And it's an easy way to do it. That being said, you can also just go to the GitHub and read through the instructions we have here. So here you have different ways. And this way is sort of, I guess, platform agnostic in that it's a viable option on Windows, Mac, Linux. And that's Docker, which is containerization. And that allows the same code base to run in that Linux container on all of these operating systems. And honestly, on a Linux computer, I've done it on Solus Linux and Alpine so far, as well as Ubuntu. It's quite easy. It's a close to native feel, and there's really not much that needs to be done on your end. On the Windows and Mac end with Docker, you might need to sort of dive into the the Docker toolbox to maybe adjust your memory limit up a little bit higher, increase your storage pool, allocate more or less processor cores. So it doesn't have that, on hardware feel. But it is also a very easy way to interact with these tools. The native version, like OpenDroneMap on Windows, like I'm using here, you don't have to do any of that. All of those resource management things are handled by Windows in the background because it's running as a native program. You don't have that container layer in between. In terms of other ways that you can get this, if you are on a Linux distribution that has Snap support, and snaps are another type of app containerization technology. You can use the OpenDroneMap Snap. And this is nice because the Snap daemon or system process on most Linux distros, so came from the Ubuntu world, but it's common in other things, relies on snapd and systemd. So this is only viable on Linux platforms that have those tools, which is a lot of them. Alpine, for instance, is one that this would not work on. You basically just download the Snap and run it, and it acts just like the Docker version. The Snap daemon will check typically once in a 24-hour window for updates and automatically update it for you in the background. Really easy, really clean. You can see we've got a number of different people using it, which I find really neat. And somewhere on there should be my Solus one. But this is another one of those avenues where if you're on Linux, it's not necessarily compile yourself or Docker. We also have the Snap. Looking forward, I would like to try to expand that to include Flatpak as well, which is yet another app sort of containerization technology that would allow this toolkit to run on systems that don't have systemd or snapd. So that would expand it to things like Alpine, Void, and I guess systems that adopt things like OpenRC, which I guess is the more Unix style of process management. So, trying to get this running everywhere for everyone. You also have, in terms of where this can run, right? If, say, part of your decision tree is either I don't have a computer that I'm confident is fast enough, or, in my case, I have a personal computer, one desktop, right? If I have this thing stitching all day, I can't do anything else. My computer is not powerful enough for me to be processing imagery and stitching while doing other things. You also have the option of Lightning, which is run by UAV4Geo, and it is a hosted instance of OpenDroneMap in the cloud. It allows you to sort of not necessarily, worry about what your platform is, right? Because you're not doing the processing. At this point, your responsibility is uploading the imagery, hitting run, and then, having a coffee, maybe having dinner, coming back, collecting your data, and moving on with your day. It is a paid service, And for some people, that decision sort of path makes a lot of sense. And for others, it may not. Everyone's in. So, that is another option as well for a way, in this ecosystem, how can you interact with this tool set? I'll give you a quick overview of sort of what the dashboard looks like. You have credits. Credits are a unit to sort of, I guess, conceptualize how many images can be processed at once. To that end, you have the estimator. So if you say you did a really small job, right? You flew your backyard, you had 50 photos, that's 22 credits roughly. And it's hosted on, I believe, Amazon Web Services. It's very scalable, very fast. And in some cases, that also might be part of your decision matrix. Even if you process at home, sometimes it can be nice to just say, I need this quickly. I don't want to worry about it. And you can pass it off to the cloud. Sort of tangential to that, you have the option of taking the various OpenDroneMap tools and hosting them yourself. We have people on the forum who have had success with Amazon, DigitalOcean, and other cloud hosting providers to provide that sort of hosted infrastructure. Along with these tools, you also have companion things like cluster ODM, which basically allows you to set up your own local processing cluster. So you could have your own distributed network of processing machines, in-house, in business. And that's another way that you can sort of take this toolkit, scale it, and make it work for you in a way that is beneficial to you and just sort of adds value to how you're working. Along with that, we also have the live ODM, which is actually the first way I got introduced to OpenDroneMap. At the time, I didn't have a native Linux machine. I was not interested in running Docker. And the native version for Windows didn't exist yet. So live ODM is sort of my first introduction. And I really enjoyed the ease of use. Basically, you have this USB stick that you dedicate to it. You boot into it. It loads right into the desktop. You're ready to process. It's super easy. And, once you're done, shut everything down, take out the stick, your computer's back to the state it was before. So that's another potential path you can have if these options that I had talked about before don't seem like the path you want to take. We want to make sure that you have other paths. So that's an overview of, I guess, most of the ecosystem. As you can see, the ecosystem here encompasses many other things and is always growing and expanding and just getting more and more powerful due to the contributions of Piero, Stephen, other people that contribute on the GitHub, and also, importantly, people in the community who are adding value to what we do by either writing code, donating to funding drives, bringing up issues and bug reports, feature suggestions. All of these things are really critical to helping the software and the ecosystem grow and mature in a healthy way. And being a part of that in the past and still being, part of it now with my role with OpenDroneMap has been really, really excellent. And it's great to see so many people coming into the community with this energy and this drive to sort of see this project grow. And everyone's bringing really neat ideas. And it's really nice. And I want to thank all of you for, being a part of that and driving this process. Okay, so I think if nobody has any immediate questions, I'm going to probably stop screen sharing for just a moment because I don't think it lets me pause. Looks like nothing. Okay, so I guess I'm going to go over real quick a processing example using the WebODM for Windows native installer. So when you land in WebODM, it's going to look something akin to this. And let me just sort of clean this up a little. You have your tool panel arranged on the left. You have your projects here. Projects and tasks are sort of a hierarchy of how to organize the data. So you can think of a project as a collection of tasks. Say if you were mapping your own personal land, right? And you could have a project, say apartment, right? And you would like to map your yard multiple times, right? So a task would be created when you sort of pick that and upload the imagery. So now this could be one of my projects, right? I would start processing it, and then you could add another project by import, or another set of tasks, basically by importing more data. What's really neat with that type of organization is you have the ability, if you see here, the view map, what that'll do is that will zoom to the minimum extent that encompasses all your data. So if you were processing, let's say, a project that was, since this was what I used to do, agricultural, and you were mapping multiple fields on a farm, if you were to view map for that project, you would see all of the different fields at once in one overview map, which can be really useful for contextualizing what you've done and what you've collected. In terms of a general processing flow, sort of as I hinted at here, you can make a new project if it makes sense for how you want to organize things. You select your images and ground control points. For this project, I don't have any ground controls, so I would just select all of the files that represent this particular task. It's going to try to get a friendly name for you from the geo information in the images. You can override that if need be. And your processing nodes are typically going to, if it's a clean install that you've just done, you're probably only going to have your node ODM1, which is auto created by the install process. Optionally, if you do have a Lightning account with credits, you can add that on as well as an additional node to switch to. If you're more advanced and you're a cluster user, you would probably see more items in here, depending upon how many items you have set up through your cluster ODM. There's a number of default processing parameters, and these represent sort of a first start guide for a lot of people to sort of help them decide, how should I process this data set? There are a large number of flags in the program. So if we were to kind of look at it, this can be a little daunting at first, especially when you're getting started. What's really nice about this interface and how PRO has it set up is every parameter, if you hover on the eye, will have a tooltip that gives you a brief description of what this does. In some cases, that's more than enough to sort of set you down the path of like, do I need this or not? How do I tune it? And in some cases, it's going to be a very helpful hint, but you might be lacking some of the context to understand the larger picture of how this impacts what you're doing and how this interacts with other options. To that extent, we have the community.opendronemap.org available for asking questions, getting clarification. This would be the landing page for that. There's also the documentation, which would be docs.opendronemap.org. There is also some other hints and tips on the GitHub, and there's also the OpenDroneMap, the Missing Guide book, which goes into much further detail, a lot of background context and information that sort of helps you understand the theory and processes behind a lot of these tools. I guess sort of more like an academic approach to it, which can be really helpful for helping you decide how you would like to approach some of these options. But for most people, what do I typically say is start with the defaults. They're there for a reason. These are very sensible defaults, and most projects you throw at it should stitch totally fine with this. Me personally, I usually like having minor tweaks. I usually turn off cropping. If I decide I want to crop later, I usually do that myself. And I really like having the debug and verbose flags turned on because I just like seeing the console log scroll by with more information. Kind of weirds me out when I don't see updates in the console. Is something hung or not? Typically not, but it can be nice to have that feedback. So at this point, you've picked your node, you've picked your images, you've picked your processing options, be it one of the defaults, a set of parameters you've decided to tune yourself, and you would basically hit start processing, and it's going to upload them to the processing node, and away it goes. I'm going to cancel this one because it might interfere with the recording. But it'll, process through, and you'll get information through here. Just earlier, I did, one of the OpenDroneMap sample data sets, which is the Brighton Beach Road. So, your process has finished. You're excited to see what's going on. You can just jump right into the view map. So in this case, we have our lovely ortho placed over the background imagery for context. And you can pan around. You can look at your camera positions, which can be really helpful for sort of troubleshooting lack of coverage in certain areas, or other issues with your data set. You can adjust the filters here to sort of drop values, and you can also turn on things like the plant health model. In this case, you need to be aware of what models are appropriate for your type of platform. So this was taken with an unmodified RGB camera. So I would say I'm trying to think what index might be appropriate. ENDVI might be one of the more appropriate ones. So you can use that. And this is how you can export it readily to other tools. You have the digital surface model, which I always get a big kick out of. Because I think it's fascinating just to see what this terrain looks like. And, we can zoom in and see, drain culverts. We can see the, decorative rocks that are lining the path in this particular park. So that always is fascinating to me. We have a number of other tools here on the side. Changing your base maps. You can add temporary data for overlay. You can take measurements. You can do contours. And then down here, you can switch to the 3D point cloud view, which I think is always really exciting. And, you can inspect your data, get an idea for what worked, what didn't work, how the site actually looks. It can be very good to help you understand, since you're presumably going to have some familiarity with what you're flying or collecting. This would be a great way to look and see, do we have common problems like overly aggressive self-calibration, right? Do we have bowling? Is the data set sort of picking up like this or sloping away at the edges, right? And this looks, to me, it looks perfect, honestly. You have a road that looks very road-like. There's obviously changes in elevation, but nothing that looks suspicious. So this view can be very helpful in contextualizing that. I think what else would be a good example? If you want, we also have the console view. The console is very helpful, and the syntax is pretty clean, not too crazy. An example would be something like this. So basically, running the analysis, choosing your starting point. Usually if I'm running something on the console, I'm going to rerun from all. Any flags that you liked. And these are basically related to what we saw here. In the individual task, those flags on the command prompt are these options here. So this view, the WebODM GUI, is basically abstracting away the act of you having to pick and type these from here. But as you can see, these tooltips that you would have in the GUI, you're also going to have here on the command prompt when you use the help option. So you can see, what do these do? What's the description for these? And this would be an example, you would hit run and it would process just the same as if you're doing it through the graphical interface. For some people, this can be more comfortable. It can be faster. You can potentially automate things this way. For me, I typically do it through the WebODM dashboard now that it's available to me. But you do have this option as well. When you have your stuff processed, depending upon what options you've chosen, you have a number of different assets or products that you can get out of it. So, if you're looking to, say, deliver things to a client or to move outside of OpenDroneMap's viewer, this is when the download assets button becomes very important to you. And again, these options are all going to show up, but it's not necessarily the case that all of these items were generated for you, again, depending upon how you've chosen to process it. But the all asset zip would have basically everything that you would need. So if you were to have that zip and you unzipped it somewhere, what you would basically see in that folder would be very similar to this. You would have your point cloud, the DEM. So, in this case, I'm going to say where I wanted to view it in QGIS. That's how I wanted to interact with this data. So, we have that. We have our 3D model, which will take a moment here. We have our ortho, and these are all because these are the options I chose, right? This is what I asked it to produce for me. You have your report, which is really cool. And we're going to look at that one in a moment. Drag that on here. You have your 3D textured model. You have cameras. Oops. Should be this one. Maybe. No. That one. There we go. So you have your cameras, and you can inspect things and interact with them very similar to how you could in the WebODM GUI. So you can see that the viewer in the GUI has a lot of these tools sort of integrated into it and presented in a sort of one-stop shop for most people's needs, which can be very helpful. It's very convenient, and the barrier to entry is a lot lower than asking someone to learn the basics of using a GIS suite to interact with a lot of these tools. So that can be very beneficial. But you do have the option, like I said, if you export that zip file, all of these assets are there for you. You can interact with them in ways that make sense. Oftentimes, I like to take things into QGIS to do further processing or validation. But if that's not your use case, you don't need to. You don't need to worry about it. Like, the tools in the GUI should be, your starting point. You have other options that, for more detailed viewing, you can open up things in, let's say, Mesh Lab or Cloud Compare, and these would be, that's a bad mesh, sort of a more focused view of how to interact with that data. Let's see. Oh, all right. Same thing would be for Cloud Compare as well. Here you can manipulate the point clouds directly. You can filter them, scale them, sort of query them and poke at them in a way that allows you to modify them. So that's another interesting thing that you can sort of use to combine with your pipeline with OpenDroneMap. Let's take a look over that. Sort of an example. And I guess at this point, we are about where I would like to be to sort of, first let's look at the report real quick. My bad. The report gives you an overview of the data set and how it processed. It can be a really neat way to assess your data's quality and look for any potential issues. You can look at your number of reconstruction images. So for instance, the one I was demoing briefly, the apartment, I know that like 5 of those images just do not process. The exposure is overblown. So, if we were to look at that one fully processed, it would say something like 16 out of 21, processed. It gives you your flight path. So you reconstructs the camera positions, gives you the preview of the DEM and the digital surface model. The overlap view, this is, in my opinion, like absolutely crucial. It's very, very useful. especially if you are having difficulty with one of your data sets, you have holes in it, certain areas look very blurry, or things don't seem right. You want to look at this and get an idea of, okay, maybe, this part here, if you did want that edge, you can see that it's only basically 2 camera positions have those pixels. That gives you an idea that, okay, maybe I don't have enough overfly. I need to bump my flight lines out, 10 meters northwest of where I had it before. So I get another transect in, and then you would refly it, go back, collect, process, and then, you would see most likely light green to dark green all through here. You also have an idea of like what your error projections are, how it's extracting features from the lens, basically the position, the pixel position. This can be sounds silly, but if you have a really dirty lens, and I've had this happen, there was like a piece of dirt stuck on the lens because I didn't aim the camera up when I was taking off in a field. There was no features stitched on one corner of the lens because, a quarter of my lens was occluded by dirt. And that did show up in the processing report, which is kind of fun. If you have a lens with severe barrel distortion, you might see more features matching sort of in here with like a fade out to the edges. And then again, that just gives you an idea of looking through your camera's lens, where is it able to pull useful information from? If it's a fixed lens platform, you may not be able to do anything with that information. Or it may prompt you to sort of change maybe how you adjust your camera, your flight height. If you have filters on the lens, maybe the filters are occluding the corners because they're not wider than the lens aperture. So it can be a useful way to sort of debug for you, which part of my lens and my sensor are getting used. Tracks are another way to look at your data. Basically, the number of actually I don't understand this all very well, but typically you would see lower tracks on data sets that have high overlap and side lap. That's just my understanding. That might need to be corrected if anyone has any feedback on that. And this is the norm graph. So that should be basically where I guess a feature was detected on the sensor and the image, and where it was projected to once all of the other data and the reconstruction is done. So basically showing you like, I guess, the pixel shift error. I don't know how basically I would read or interpret that, other than intuition tells me you probably want to keep that as low as possible. But that is, I believe, a newer addition to our processing report as things have gone on. And at this point, I am going to stop screen sharing. I'm going to ask anyone who would like to or is comfortable to, do you have any questions? I want to open this up for basically just questions about anything we've gone over, questions in general, feedback, or like maybe like a quick help if you've had, you're stuck on something and you think, okay, I need, a minute of help, or, hey, can you show me how to add photos? Can you show me where to get this thing? I would like to sort of involve anyone from the audience that would like to go over that. If not, that's also totally fine. Anyone wants to, you can raise your hand, unmute, use the chat, whatever works best for you. I cannot hear if you're talking. You might need to unmute yourself. I don't know if I can do that for you. Is it not letting anyone unmute themselves? Oh, I hear something. No, Piero, that was you. Guru, there's a number of different ways. One of the ones that I didn't touch on is also the Windows subsystem for Linux. We did a big fundraiser back in, I want to say November, and we got that working as well. So you wouldn't necessarily have to use the Docker way or the native way. You could also grab the Windows subsystem for Linux image and run it that way if you played with it before, you're comfortable with that. And if anyone wants to reach out to me on the forum, or my email is in my Jitsi profile here, reach out. Forum is probably the best way. If you have a question, other people almost certainly have that same question or have had it. So getting us all together to discuss it is probably the best way to address it. And Woody, take your time on typing that. I am sorry that you are unable to mute. Yeah, I can't unmute for you, so it doesn't look like you're blocked. Yes, it does. Absolutely, it does. Ooh, that's a good question, Woody. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm probably not the most qualified person to answer that question. I have ideas on how I would approach that, but having not implemented those ideas, I wouldn't like to give you the answers. Yes, the Raspberry Pi is like a Pi 4B 8 gig. It intuitively, I think a number of those load balancing, because I know there's a couple of different load balancing tile servers, for instance, that you OSGeo has. I think that'd be great. I don't know how to do that. I don't know if Piero, you have any thoughts on that, or if that might be a better question to ask on the forum.
No, it's an excellent question. I mean, my advice would be to, I don't know, yeah, I don't know, I'm not sure on the Raspberry Pi. I'm not a Raspberry Pi expert, but in general, if you want to host the results somewhere, the way to go is to simply install an instance of WebODM. You can do that on some cheap cloud hosting, like DigitalOcean is an excellent one that serves the US market and the European market. You just launch one of their cheap instances. They cost $5 a month. You just load up WebODM, and you can process the data through Lightning. And that allows you to use the cheap instances, because those don't typically have a lot of memory. But it doesn't matter, because all the processing gets done by Lightning. So then you can use those instances simply to keep the results stored there. So I currently recommend with that. I think we also have a FAQ on WebODM.net, I think. Let me double check, because it's a question that comes up often.
I think, would you not also be able to, let's say if you process locally, exporting the all.zip, you should be able to import that as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Yes. Yeah. So the way is step 1, install WebODM on a VPS, and step 2, import the results to the WebODM instance so that you can host them there and then share them. For RAM, probably at least 1 gig. 2 would be better, I think. I haven't done a whole lot of testing on small instances recently, but I think you can get by with something as low as 1 gig. 2 is probably recommended, however.
All right. And Guru, to your point, yes, I mentioned briefly, and I'm going to just screen share here again for a moment, if you guys or folks don't mind. So I had mentioned earlier Jeremy Davis or Optic Unity posting a really cool data set. So this is on our community forum. And this would be an example of what I was talking about earlier, the non-drone or non-SUAS data sets taken from like a 360 camera on the ground. Here is a building that he mapped, basically just by walking around the building. And I thought this was really, really, really cool. And I had mentioned earlier also Klaas. He has done some really neat stuff. I'm, of course, going to struggle to find examples of his projects. So I probably should have queued this up earlier. I apologize. Here we go. He does phenomenal ground-based collection and processing. That one might be airborne. Here we go. Walking along, like I said, he has like a GoPro, and I believe he puts it on like a selfie pole on his backpack. So I think it's got like maybe like a 9 or 12 foot above ground elevation. And he walks, bikes, travels, and he has gotten some really, really phenomenal collections of roadside features around his city. Let me see. I apologize. There you go. Another drainage culvert. This one again, walking through. So he even did a nice little fly through. This is a really fun Twitter account to follow if you want to see someone who's just like an absolute genius with QGIS and OpenDroneMap. I've really enjoyed watching everything that he's done and all the different collections he's been able to do. So to your point, Guru, absolutely. Let's see. Woody output. Yes, Guru, please do. Woody, to your questions, there's an auto crop algorithm for the products, and I sort of touched on how I normally turn that off. So this sort of basically, I think, looks for, and Piero can correct me on this, I'm sure, like holes in the data set and tries to make a cut line that removes sort of non-contiguous islands of data and finding basically the largest contiguous piece. But yeah, in terms of like, let's say if you're interested in more directly editing the point cloud or the 3D model that's generated from it, we don't have that functionality yet. I'm not sure if that's something that's on Piero's radar, but I do know a number of people in the forum, I actually have it up right here, have had success with basically manually cleaning and tuning the point cloud in something like MeshLab or Cloud Compare to clean up errant edges or spots in the reconstruction that didn't really go over very well. So this is like a before and after of this user who did that. So there, obviously that's not the workflow you're looking for, but there are options to sort of do that. I don't know an automated point cloud, filter what that would look like, whether we might run into issues with throwing out stuff that people might actually want. That could be tough. But I don't know, Piero, if you want to talk on that briefly.
Yeah, I mean, the issue with the 3D part is that it's difficult to do something automated. Automated cropping of 3D is an ill-posed question because it's difficult to define what parts are really parts that we want to crop and what are parts that we don't want to crop. It could be possible for us at some point to allow either the software to crop the results based on a initial boundary that the user defines. So say like the user already knows that the end model is going to end up being within a certain boundary, and we simply crop everything that's outside of that boundary out. That's been it's part of the feature request that it is being considered. Just a matter of time before we implement it. And the other approach is to simply allow the interface to allow a workflow where you can crop the result after it's been processed. So something integrated within WebODM where you draw a box and anything outside of that box gets cropped. So yes, these two options are certainly being considered. Automated cropping is probably not going to happen too soon, simply because it's hard to define the problem, but something that has some type of manual user input to the cropping process in 3D is definitely being considered.
Yeah, that's very useful. And like Pierre had mentioned, the processing extent, like defining that, in 3D would be really cool. There are commercial suites I've used that have that, and it can be incredibly helpful, especially for data sets where you have like highly oblique imagery and you don't want to be wasting processing time reconstructing, the side of a tree, half a mile away from your field because your drone happened to catch it, in 5 images, kind of a waste of time. So having that type of functionality is, that would be a huge workflow improvement. Let's see here. Oh, and I would like to highlight real quick something from Jay Portalese. And this is really neat. If you guys or you folks aren't all on the community forum, I would highly, highly recommend dropping by and taking a poke around. This is a reconstruction that was stitched in OpenDroneMap, and it absolutely blows my mind how clean this is. You can see the survey planning they did, really quite detailed. So you basically have that cross grid, and then you have an orbit with highly oblique imagery to sort of capture the sides of the faces of the building. And it resulted in, didn't capture everything, but, the quality of the model is really quite exceptional. So, we're seeing a lot of neat things on the community, and, I get like a huge kick out of seeing what everyone's doing, what they're up to, and how they approach things. And I'm learning a ton from watching everyone and how they contribute. So, like I said, if you have a chance, if you have interest, please join. Bring your questions, bring your projects, bring everything, or just come and sort of sponge. I did that for years before I really contributed anything. There's just so much cool stuff going on. And I think going forward, I would like to, the next session, I would like to really try to highlight what people are doing. So I might make that part of my sign up form, would be to ask if you have anything you would like to share and highlight. And again, if you could take a moment, visit on the forum, email, whatever, give me feedback, good, bad, whatever, I don't care. I want this to be accessible and usable for everyone. And in order for that to happen, I need everyone's feedback. Ooh, thank you, Piero. Yes, Woody, how people are collecting. That is an art and a science unto itself. And that seems to be constantly evolving. So yeah, having everyone sort of joining in on that and giving their in-field best practices and things that they've learned, I think is going to be an absolute wealth of information. There's so much to learn. I'm glad you enjoyed it, Guru. Yeah, there's a lot, Woody. Pix4D capture is pretty neat. I used it briefly with my 3DR Solo, but I got tired of having to like reinstall a old version that had it supported as a beta. Okay, yeah, so you don't have to worry about that. These days, I mostly do Mission Planner to design the survey, and then I monitor with Solex. But Stephen Mather has an incredible blog series. I think it's 4 or 5 posts on how to optimize your collection to prevent things like overly aggressive self-calibration and distortion of your data set. Basically, instead of having the typical either, zigzag survey or the cross grid, sort of like an offset by, I think it was 20 degrees regular survey, and then tilting your camera instead of, let's say, being directly at nadir or 90 degrees down from flight, between 5 to 10 degrees off of nadir, so like 85-ish degrees. And then also having, if you have that cross grid that's offset by 20 degrees, having one of your cross grid surveys offset from the other one in the z-axis, or the y-axis rather, the height by about 10 meters. And all of those things combined basically prevent you from getting aggressive self-calibration and really improves the quality of your collection and data set. It's been linked to a number of times on the forum. I can also, if you give me just a moment, I can link you that now. Right. Forgive me. All right, I might have to come back to that. I don't have the link handy at the moment. Oh, my bad. I apologize. Yeah, I guess that's a okay. Now I understand your question better. Yes, so sort of having a pulse on exactly what tools people are using. Yeah, I think that would be very useful. Like you said, what platform people are flying with, what tools they're using to collect. Yeah, that's all very useful. Thanks. Does anyone else have any questions or comments or anything they want to add? And again, this will be going up on the YouTube probably later today. So either tonight or tomorrow should be viewable. I'm going to update the link in the community forum with the link to the YouTube video. So hopefully that should have auto captions and translations available if people need that accessibility. I can't do that through Jitsi at this point. I don't know if they're going to add that. But yeah, if everyone's all good, I think we are just about on time for today. And I want to thank you all for joining us and contributing. It's always a pleasure. And yeah, if you can get a chance, fill out that feedback form, give me an idea of what I can do better for y'all. And we will see you hopefully in either 2 weeks to a month for another one. Thanks so much. Have a good day, everyone.